You're listening to the Jordan Lee Podcast. All right, welcome back. This is another episode where I am Jordan Lee, and I am here with my wife, Laura Walker Lee.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about kind of design, business, and brand. And really with this episode, I want to dive into kind of my process, what builds a successful brand, why it's important. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a designer, a founder, strategist, creative director, developer, right? You work in creative or digital. So I want to kind of break this down into like 5 pillars. We can talk about discovery. We'll talk about positioning. We'll talk about archetypes. We'll talk about creative expression. We'll talk about the strategy. And so we'll kind of work through those pieces and see where it goes, right?
Yeah. Can we all, I also want to just acknowledge like the point in time that we're in and how brand relates to people, to businesses, and just like, people's trajectories as like leaders in a space or businesses, being successful in their category. Like, I just feel like things are really shifting and developing brand is more important than ever.
Yeah. I mean, we're at the end of 2024, just for reference, right?
Yeah.
And you and I have been working in our fields of creative design, brand, strategy, finance, right? For, 20 years, 15 to 20 years, right? And so we've seen the internet go through a lot of stages from like, we were kind of kids during the .com crash, but we saw like Web 2.0. I remember Facebook and MySpace when nobody was even on it, right? It was kind of like you had to go to your computer in your dorm room to hop on and surf it. And then the iPhone comes out, 2010, 2009, 2010, somewhere there. And then we see mobile apps just explode, right?
Right.
And then we see kind of the 2015, 2016, the content creator explosion on YouTube and social media and Instagram, and then the rise of like the influencer. And then we see all of the studies of like what the internet and social media and news and misinformation and propaganda, like what all of this is doing to us, right? And now we see TikTok where our attention span is super short. So how, inside of all of that, we've worked with like really amazing projects and brands across those eras, I guess, in the last 15, 20 years. And like the evolution and change of how brands work because of how audiences work, right? And what you're saying is like, let's be aware of where we are and consider where we're headed and what that might look like, right?
Right. Yeah. And I feel like, as I've thought about brand, as I've talked to you, I think over the years, it's felt like kind of a niche thing that not a lot of people would pursue or should pursue. But that's changed, I think, with the internet and the democratization of platform. You don't have to have the permission of networks to get on television. You don't have to have the permission of, any sort of gatekeeper to get your message out. And I think people's attentions are drifting away from traditional media onto YouTube, which is the second largest search engine in the world. Google is number 1, YouTube is number 2. And I think that branding oneself or a business is it's not for like the elite or like the very like a niche crowd. It's for a lot of people. And I was listening to a keynote that was given, I think like last month. And someone was talking about how there's like a 5-year window that if you are selling a service, a product, or a philosophy, you have about a 5-year window from now to establish yourself and your brand before the computers and AI start to consolidate things for people. And like a practical example of that is, if I walk into my home and I ask Amazon Alexa, like, hey, Alexa, I need the top 5 plumbers in my zip code to, fix a problem in my bathroom. Then Alexa and AI is going to consolidate it for me, and it's going to give me the top 5 plumbers according to what the internet says. And so branding's important from that perspective because you have to get into the AI engine, but it's a very different experience than if I walk into my home and I say, hey, Alexa, please give me Joe Plumber's information to fix the problem in my bathroom, because Joe Plumber has a brand and to be known to like fix very tough problems. And I have an opinion that I'm bringing to the AI search. But if Joe Plumber is not branding and marketing himself, then I'm never going to know to, ask for that from my AI search engine. So I think that, there's a lot of sci-fi movies and, people have talked about how computers are going to take over and everything in the future. And it doesn't seem like that's plausible, but it's happening now. Like, I use Perplexity, which is an AI engine, and sometimes I bring an opinion to a search question, like asking about a certain person, and sometimes I don't. I rely fully on AI to consolidate the internet and tell me what is the best of something.
Yeah, but can I jump in?
Yeah.
You have to consider the algorithm of AI and how they're scraping the internet and where they're getting their information from these large language models. Prior to this, it was, 5 years ago, businesses could throw a bunch of money at Facebook ads, right? Or Google ads.
Yeah.
And that was working for their business until Facebook decides to change the algorithm and they like your business or they don't like your business, right?
Right.
Prior to that, 10 years ago, even further back, like you had all of these SEO marketing gurus who basically would gamify the internet so you would populate up higher in search results in local, and global stuff, right? Like it was all, and then they would change the algorithm and the game would change, and then everyone kind of shifted over to Facebook, and now like AI is changing the game again, where it's like kind of what you're saying. You used to just be like focus on kind of traditional paths of marketing and media to call yourself a quote unquote brand or your business, right?
Right.
Well, now it's like you said, the CNNs and the Fox News and the MSNBCs are not our source of news anymore. It's like we go on to X and listen to like Elon Musk, or we listen to 3.5 hours of Joe Rogan and some guy talk. That's where we're. So it's the human like side mixed with like the digital medium and the platform that AI is going to leverage. And if you're not doing that now, like in 5 years, you're going to be sunk, basically.
Right. Yeah. You're just going to be filtered out.
No amount of money or spending or, it's almost like the propaganda side of marketing.
Right.
Let's just throw money at ads and get it in front of people. Like we're kind of rewiring our brains, right? In the way that like that doesn't do it for us anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that what we're talking about now. I'm trying to like articulate a shift in my thinking from branding as a nice to have to branding as a need to have. I used to think branding was like for people who were really confident and into themselves and just wanted to, push out an image of them.
Yeah, the personal brand era, right?
Right.
Like everyone has a personal brand, and like, what does that mean? What does that really mean, and what does that mean to them?
Right, and And I think that when we're forecasting for the way that technology is trending and how people are going to be living their everyday lives and try to make them better, the example I gave with Alexa or Perplexity or whatever sort of search engine and the way the internet's getting sorted, I think it puts it in very, very practical terms that it is important the way that you are presenting to the world. And if you're like a really high-powered executive, for instance, who has been in a company for 20 years and you don't think you have to brand yourself, well, people don't work at one company for their whole career. It's pretty rare. And so at some point, you're probably going to find yourself out in the wilderness. And if you have no internet presence, I promise you, when you're meeting with people and you're trying to sell a service, a product, a philosophy, or yourself, like you're trying to get a job, the first thing someone's going to do is Google you.
Mm-hmm.
And what are they going to find?
Yeah.
So, I think, for these reasons, branding, it's important.
Yeah. I mean, even doing this podcast is kind of an exercise for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I've been so behind the scenes by choice.
Yeah.
That, it's interesting to see, me sharing my process, my work, and all of this. What would that do for, my audience, my brand, right? Mm-hmm. My business. So it's kind of, let's see how that goes. The one thing I did want to say, though, is with what you were talking about is, whether you, however you use the internet, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's connecting to your TV or your phone or your laptop, and it's a platform to listen to music or consume media, or it's a beautiful car designed website that you experience, you scroll down, or it's a business, or it's eBay, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. All the internet boils down to at the core level is filter and search. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. And it's how we experience the filter and search. And what I want to say is, even if you're listening to this and you think you don't have a brand or you don't need a brand in the future, or this does not apply to you, the other thing is in the future is by understanding brands and what they're communicating in the story they're telling to you allows you to search and filter out the stuff that AI and these algorithms are giving to you, right?
Right.
So for example, I'll be real quick, but with archetypes, the jester archetype and the lover archetype, don't really appeal to me. Mm-hmm. I like explorer, creator, outlaw, heroic brands, and I like that stuff that they offer.
Yeah.
So when I see something and I can identify what the brand represents, if they're doing their brand and their messaging right, I know within 5 seconds, is this something that I'm going to be interested in or not, right? So with AI and the future of the Internet of Things, right? Mm-hmm. If you understand brands, even if you don't want to use this for your own business or your personal brand, understanding the type of food that you want your refrigerator to pre-order from you in the future, there's a certain type of yogurt that you want, right? Mm-hmm. The organic, goat's milk yogurt versus the processed generic stuff. Mm-hmm. Those are two very different brands, right? So what I'm saying is it's very valuable to look at the world through the lens of what are they communicating to me and does it apply to me? Because I think we're in this so much noise that we need, our brains naturally filter things out. We're very good at, when you're driving a car, there's millions of points of data that are coming at you, but our brains are solely focused on a few things at a time.
Yeah.
So with the internet and brands, there's a lot of brands doing a lot of things, and it's, pulling our attention away. I mean, you could give the story example of when you move to LA and all the billboards, right? Yeah. It's when you move here,
yeah,
it is just overwhelming. I mean, it's a lot to take in, right? And then after you live here for a few years, you don't even notice it.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is if you can be aware of the types of brands and archetypes and all of that, you can use it to your advantage in one way or another. You can use it to build your business and your brand, or you can use it to be aware and filter out kind of the stuff that doesn't really apply to you.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the billboard example is a great example. Okay, so I think we've answered the why should I care question. The other two things that come to mind before we dive into the different pillars is, one is some people think, oh, I can do this myself. Or I can just emulate a strategy that I see some other successful person emulating or doing. And the example I think of, because, I've done some of this, work with you with founders, I work in venture capital. And so I work with founders who are trying to raise capital or, trying to position themselves for exit for their investors. And so as, a person running a company, their profile is important. And I've seen a lot of founders, look to say like Elon Musk, and they think, oh, well, I can do the same thing. I can open up a Twitter account or an X account, and I can just be kind of, silly and meme-like and, things like that because it's worked for Elon. Well, if that's not your inherent personality, people are going to pick up on it right away. Like, I think that the opening up of the internet and platform, having been around for 10, 15 years now, I think people are really smart and they're very attuned to authenticity. And if you're just trying to emulate someone else's strategy that's not unique to you, it's not going to resonate. And so you have to do the deep work of figuring out, what is my archetype? Who is my audience, and all the pillars that we're going to go through to really understand who you're speaking to, how you're speaking to them, how it resonates with your soulfully held values and, your business goals and things like that. Like doing that work is going to I think, produce really great content that people are going to trust. And I have this saying that business moves at the speed of trust. And if people trust you and your reputation online, you're more likely to convert. Again, whether you're selling a service, a product, or a philosophy. So that's the first thing. Don't think you can do it on your own. Second thing is, there are a lot of really smart people sitting behind laptops that think, oh, I'm too boring, or I'm not a quote unquote personality. Like the branding's not going to work for me. But I know a lot of boring people who are successful at doing this. Why? Because they're subject matter experts. Like you're so normalized to the information that you've accumulated over years and decades that you don't think it's special anymore. But it is special to lots of people out there, depending on what they're looking for. And I just want to underscore that you don't have to be a certain type of person to engage with the branding process and have it be successful for you.
So to kind of add to what you were saying, It reminds me of, I was listening to Christopher Langan, who he has the highest IQ score, 210 or something like that. And he was talking, but inside of this talk I was listening to, he was describing how really, really smart people kind of look at things at the depth. Like if you're looking through the lens of a camera, they have a lot of depth in certain areas and certain fields, but they lack the aperture, the wideness of the landscape that they can see, right? And so really smart people get super focused on stuff, but sometimes they can't open up the lens, open up the aperture to get the full picture, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the work that I do is working with really smart, successful people who are hyper-focused on their business or how they see the world. And my work really is this collaborative exploration to kind of open up the aperture. And there's a lot of things that they start to see and discover that maybe they've missed. and it's like, hey, maybe, or maybe their lens was correct and they were focused, but like, let's widen it a bit to see what else is going on, to make that focus shift a little bit. And so, it's kind of that twofold thing of like a camera lens, where you have your depth and your aperture, right? And that's kind of the work that I do, is like exploring and opening that up in a way that, like, and I think that's helpful with anything, right? Like, I mean, we hire people in our lives to help us do the things. Like, we could go on YouTube, watch a bunch of videos, but like, you hire people that are seasoned in something to help you through things, right? Whether it's mental, physical, spiritual, right? There's help. There's benefits to getting help outside of yourself. So I think that's really where I come in to do the thing. It's a benefit that I've spent so much of my time doing the practice of the thing, right? It's not just like the thinking and strategy behind it, but it's like actually executing that as well. So that's, I live with the brand and the things that the founders or the business people tell me in as almost as much as they do. I'm just taking it in a more creative, strategic brand design perspective. And so that like absorbs into my work and my thinking. And then from there, how do we execute? So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that's a really good analogy, and something that I'm thinking about. You can edit it out later if you want to, but I'm thinking about like the moments when I really love my work, and the moments when you really love your work. And, I work on the financial side, and, I bring investment to people. And some of my favorite times are like when I'm acquiring life rights from somebody, or I'm making a phone call to someone to let them know that they've been funded. And like for some people, that's life-changing money. And I see people get really emotional, and it's really nice to be able to deliver those messages to people. But with you, I feel like when you're widening the aperture for people, because you're working in brand and story, and you're like working these narrative therapy sessions with people to help them open up the aperture on the understanding of themselves. I've seen a lot of people get emotional. I know we've said that in other episodes, but like it's just really amazing to see people gain that kind of insight on themselves through the process that you walk them through. And I know it's very rewarding for you, and it keeps you moving forward.
Yeah, it's materializing the possibilities, right? And then it's bringing life to the thing. And because there's a context of depth that's built behind it, like a logo or a design can create that emotional impact for the stakeholders to have the confidence to move forward that this is the truth. This is the true representation of who we are. And from that, we can express our values, our mission, our vision in really kind of, it's a roadmap, right? And express it in really like interesting ways. So for me, like, being able to help put others at ease and then also give them the confidence, but then widen that aperture and then materialize like the feel, like creating something material, and then the emotion comes with it, right? There's a feeling to it.
Yeah. And I think ultimately people just want to be known. Like they want to be, like there's that saying, it's one thing to be loved, it's another thing to be known. And I think that with your work, I think that people, they want to be known by others, and also they want to gain a deeper understanding of themselves. And I just think you have a very unique branding process. I mean, you just went through an experience with a client where they hired a designer and they were unhappy with the product. And so they found you and they hired you. And like the difference between the experience with the other designer and you was like not even day and night. It was like planets apart. It was so different for them. They were just completely floored. So, like the process that you have, I think is unique to you, and it's not widely taught to other designers. And that's also a big reason why we're doing this series is because just, best practices, right?
Yeah. And, I'm so confident in my process that like within these pillars, like the art and creative and the things happen, right? And the stuff that emerges out of it is very different from project and project, client to client, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I feel like it's starting to sound a little magical, and it's actually much more practical. So let's get into the pillars.
So the first piece is the discovery and insight step, right? And that's where really things kick off. And so, within that, there's like, who are we designing for? What are we designing? What's the purpose? What's the business? What's the mission, right? And it's a very collaborative part of my process with the stakeholders. So the founder, the business, the creatives, right?
Yeah.
And so through that, like, there's a lot of like discussion. There's a lot of back and forth. I facilitate a lot of these kind of brainstorming sessions, design thinking pieces. And it's really to map out business models, kind of identifying the core brand attributes, understanding who the audience is, and like using all of that to build a creative direction. And, that's, I will not take on any project without being able to do this with people, because there has to be a foundation that's set. It's like how you build trust, right? I want to hear from you, and I want you to hear from me, and I want the reciprocation to happen where we're opening up and sharing about things, because beneath the business, beneath the audience, beneath the brand is the why, right? Like the Simon Sinek stuff, the Steve Jobs stuff.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we get stuck on like profitability, return on revenue, KPIs, push, right? But like if you're not waking up every day and like fueled by why you exist and what your purpose is, like it's miserable, And so this discovery process is really to kind of unearth the things, and then very quickly out of that, kind of the creative stuff happens. But that's kind of the first part. And so, I tell people like it's very surgical. It's not like throwing spaghetti against the wall. It is a way in which it would be irresponsible of me to not do that for people.
Right.
Because I look at their work, their projects as an investment of my time, an investment of their time, and I want to build long-term success. I'm not interested in this like shoot from the hip marketing approach to like, let's just run and gun and see what sticks and see what happens. Like, I want to be really thoughtful that there's a through line that we can be short-sighted, but we know where we're headed long-term. I've worked in a lot of situations where like it's very short-sighted all the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like bouncing off the guardrails a lot.
Right.
And it's not really effective. And so I think this came out of work and experience of like, where is all of this headed? And so that's what this does.
Right. And you mentioned like, marketing and shooting from the hip and stuff. There's also marketing people that are really dialed into metrics, and they're just metrics, right?
Yep.
And they're having the metrics drive the brand.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how that's problematic?
It's problematic because you're buried in numbers, and brands and businesses are about people. And if you kind of diminish the value of everything to numbers and resources and users, and you're not thinking about the emotional human side of the work that you do, like you're kind of you're missing your aperture is not very wide.
This reminds me of a story real quick. It reminds me of the TV show Lost. And you haven't heard me talk about this before, but I remember 15 years ago when Lost was like a huge TV show and it was like a phenomenon, and people loved watching it, but they didn't know like what the situation was with Lost, and it was season after season after season. And I had like 3 really good friends that I would watch it with who are now big writers in Hollywood, and they've got like TV shows and stuff. But like we watched the last episode of Lost, and it was like a nothing ending, and people were so upset. They were like that we invested so much time in watching that TV show, and we analyzed like how did the writers in the writers' room get this messed up that they couldn't land the plane. Well, land the plane. There's a plane involved in the TV show, but they couldn't figure out how to end it. And because the audience was owed an explanation about what this TV show was about, and they didn't do it. And what we figured out is that like Lost came out at a time where the internet was like becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and the writers on that show started to listen to the internet and pull it into the writers' room. They didn't stay anchored to what they created.
Right.
They used comments from the internet and tried to incorporate it into the story to appease the people on the internet, and they got, pardon the pun, completely lost. They got like they lost the plot. They couldn't figure it out. It became a total mess, and it was really unsatisfying in the end.
Right.
And I feel like that's an analogy for like CEOs who are listening to marketing people who are like, oh, we posted this on social media and we got this many views, or you know, we did this and these were incredible metrics. You can't get pulled in one direction or another by your own audience because it's going to show.
Right.
You have to stay anchored to
who
you are
Yep.
and what your vision is,
Right.
and let everyone else react to it. So.
Can I say a few things about Lost? I never watched Lost.
Okay.
I was very anti-Lost because like in college I would see my friends and how stressed out they were every week. And like we would be hanging out and like half the people would leave whatever we were doing to go watch Lost. I was just like, I'm going to wait till this thing ends and then just binge it, right?
Right.
So fast forward to like, I never really got into super big sagas like that, but I remember, you know, Game of Thrones was ending, right?
Oh,
and
wait, we have to, hold on. So, you know, I have a background in like filmmaking and TV and everything. And so we hosted a watch party for the very last episode of Game of Thrones. And we invited...
But wait.
Yeah.
We didn't watch it at all until the last season.
Right.
And like for years, friends would text me and be like, you need to watch Game of Thrones. Like you would love it. Like you're really... So like that last season, we binged like 4 or 5 seasons of it, right? Like we watched a lot of it to just try to catch up and get caught up on the story. So,
well, we tried to do that. I don't know if you remember this, but we tried to do that, and then we ended up doing is going to YouTube and just watching like the consolidated videos because we were like, we don't have enough time for this,
right?
But we are going to like host this watch party for Game of Thrones, and we invited like writers, like Emmy award-winning
directors,
writers, like people came to our house, and we had a game that we were playing, which is like how does Game of Thrones end? Like,
everyone made bets, right?
Everyone made bets, and we had like it posted on the wall next to the television.
And so everyone put their who's gonna get the throne,
who's gonna get the throne,
and people were arguing and talking the whole time, and you know, we were like chit chatting, and I was the only person to write no throne because I thought as the story goes on, I was like, it's going to be no throne because that doesn't appease anybody.
Right.
And nobody's going to be happy. And it would be a total, like Rickroll moment, right? For like the writers. And we know one of the writers on the show too, right? Like one of the guys. Yeah. So it was just kind of funny to be in a room of like 30 people and like, I don't know, I won like $150 or something, right?
Yeah. It was really funny because you were like the only non like film TV person in the room.
That's
and you
right.
ended up figuring out, you know, the winning answer.
I'm always the only non-film TV guy in that room. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I don't know. I can guess who's not going to get the throne.
Yeah.
So
sometimes it's annoying to watch TV with you because you're like, oh, then this is going to happen. And then it happens.
I watch for like, I look at it as a big puzzle, but I also watch it for like the shot layout, the cinematography, the story, the tone. Like I watch it for different things.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for us to walk out of a theater and talk about a movie because like I totally followed the emotion and the narrative and you followed like the shot list and pattern and the color palette and
what
everything.
The director's doing. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And so like our back and forth is a little, sometimes a little
It's cool.
It's cool.
It's a wide aperture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
discovering insights, I think we covered that.
Yeah. So once all of that's kind of done with the client, it's positioning, right? And so this is where positioning is looking at kind of the brand attributes, but like the competitors, and then the stuff that differentiates you and your business from the competitors, and also like the things that help you stick out, like what is your X factor? And so in this, like we really widen the aperture and say, what are the X factors and differentiators of your competitors in your industry? But what are the things that you do really well or do better than them? And maybe we narrow the focus there and kind of express out from that. So positioning is really about defining those things, researching those things, uncovering that stuff, and then building kind of the next steps of the creative from that is a big piece, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once we kind of unpack that, then we lean into kind of like the brand personality, which is the archetype side. And I think it's super important. And so Carl Jung kind of came up with this, through his work. And it's been a pretty big staple in storytelling. And there's 12 archetypes. You can look them up. I can go, I know them off the top of my head, but there's 12 archetypes. They all have different kind of attributes and personality, messages, their drive, their ambitions, their fears, their strengths, their weaknesses, right? Mm-hmm. And these archetypes, if you can start to kind of bucket your brand as a collective or your brand as an individual as like one of these archetypes, you're not really pigeonholing yourself, but you're helping your audience to quickly grasp and understand what you're about.
Right.
Right. So like Harley Davidson is very different than, Walt Disney as far as like the tone and the messaging and the brand. And so when you think about your brand as like the collective culture of your company of 30 employees, 300 employees, 3 employees, like what's the collective personality of your brand?
Yeah.
And then how do you honestly express that personality into the world? It's a really important part to creative direction and creative expression. And so I built an algorithm that quickly like looks at this and unpacks this stuff.
Yeah.
The discovery stuff really lends clues to kind of unpack that, the positioning. The brand personality can be a differentiator, right? Mm-hmm. So like a really great example is look at like car insurance companies. They're all like the jester everyman.
Yeah.
If another insurance company popped up that was like, the sage lover, like they would differentiate themselves just based on brand completely, right?
Right.
And so there's ways that the personality is super important. And it's either as the individual or as the collective. And then expressing that personality through, color choice, color psychology, typography choice, art direction, photography, film, commercial, broadcast, the voice of the brand, the tone of the brand, right? So that's kind of the next step.
Yes. I think you covered that well. One throwaway comment that you made was that you developed an algorithm to very quickly do this.
Yeah.
You don't talk about this at all, but I've seen you work on this a lot, and the creative process is pretty slow, or it has been traditionally, and Jordan really wanted to speed it up to be able to service more people, and he spent a long time with people, he partnered with people from SpaceX and McKinsey and, himself and
super smart mathematician people.
yeah. to build an algorithm to be able to really assess what someone's archetype will be and the expression. He uses it personally for himself, but if you are listening and you work at Unilever or Johnson & Johnson or some sort of mega brand where you're acquiring companies and you need to like rebrand or like, just kind of quickly, figure out what a founder or a CEO or a company needs to identify as to the public, like it's a really great tool that Jordan just uses for himself, but I think could easily apply to larger businesses.
Yeah, even for campaigns or like film and TV shows have used it with that, right?
Yeah.
And like different campaigns take on a morphed kind of personality of a brand, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember waking up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and like going out and getting a piece of paper and like mapping this idea that I had in my head out. And it's very much like, how do I capture this? Because this is really a pivotal thing for creativity in the digital space that like it's so from that it's like I've built databases of creative stuff that I can just quickly pull from, and I can build a brand much faster than the traditional agency model. And the reason I wanted to build that was because I've worked in the traditional agency.
Right.
I've seen the churn, I've seen the bloat, I've seen the waste of money, right?
Yeah.
Like we do not need 30 people in a room with 2 people talking and everyone else is just there collecting a paycheck.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, how do I build something that can help myself, but also help who I'm working with so I can work with more people and help, give them the roadmap of creativity, right?
Right. Yeah. You were trying to scale yourself so that you can help more people and also lower your price point for maybe nonprofits or people who can't normally afford you and things like that.
100%.
Anyway, that was kind of a footnote for people who are in like very big, branding businesses. But chances are, if you're listening, you're more thinking about like yourself, your one company, and that's fine. That's great. We're primarily talking to you.
Yeah. So the next like step of this is creative expression. So we have kind of the discovery, the positioning, the archetype, and we're looking at those things. And now that we have kind of those initial foundational pieces, like now let's get creative with it, right? And so from different ways to do this, the way that I really like to do it is through this idea of stylescapes. And so stylescapes is like taking mood boards to another level, but it's not like a finished piece, right? And so what I'll do is I'll kind of lean into the archetype and I'll lean into like the brand attributes and the discovery work that we've done and kind of come up with 3 to 5 creative directions. And those creative directions will tell like a brand story or a design story. Here's some possibilities of color and typography and photography, and here's some logo examples that kind of mesh with this, and here's how it could look on a product. Here's how it could look on the web or mobile. How does it kind of start to feel, right? And so this creative expression process, it's really the first place where the client sees something visual. And so we've worked together through this collaborative process where we've built this like rapport and trust and friendship. And now when I show them these things, it's not coming out of left field, right? And it also like, I never get something where it's like, this isn't what I want, this is way off, or it's like I'm not getting art directed because we've done the work together to say like, here's the path of who you really are and how do we creatively express this in a way that makes a lot of sense, right? So for example, like if your brand is like the luxury ruler, black, gold, serifed typography, very minimalist, right? Strong black and white photography might be something. Minimalist in like other colors, very monochromatic, right? That might be the approach. But if it's like a creative gesture type of brand or startup,
that might lean into more colorful tones and playful typography. So we're really kind of taking the mood board and building a more nuanced palette and saying, here's like 3 to 5. Let's look at them. Let's look at the story. And let's see how we feel, right? It's very emotional at that point.
Right. I think, what you're describing is probably like one of the most important pillars of what you do, especially as it relates to like other creatives. Like, I feel like the pillars you've described so far bring you to the creative expression, and the pillars that precede this one, you're really letting your partner, your customer, the person you're collaborating with, inform what the creative expression is going to be. Like, so many of your peers that like follow you on social media and things like that, I'll go to their like say Instagram page, and like it's the same aesthetic. Like
right.
they post and they post and they post and they post, and they're taking their own point of view, their artistic point of view, and they are pushing it out into the world. And so as a business leader, like when you're hiring them, the expectation is you're going to get something that looks like what they've done before, because that's quote unquote what they're known for. I feel like that is design like 1.0, and you're like design 2.0 or 3.0, where it's like you have abilities, but like you do have a point of view when it comes to like things that you do for fun. Like you have a very specific aesthetic, but I never see that artistic aesthetic that you do for fun. I don't see it translated into your work for clients, because your clients are the ones who you're extracting what's really important for their business, and you are letting that point of view lead the creative process.
Yeah, I think I have a pretty wide aperture when it comes to like the creative.
Yeah.
And I'm not stuck. I don't want to sit in the niche of something, right? There's one example of where the client asked me to do more of that artistic stuff, right?
Right.
And it made sense, right? Because they're artists, musicians, and so and when I do kind of album art stuff for musicians and things, that's appropriate.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the ability to recognize, like, I think there's a few core tenets of good design. I'd love to do a podcast about that, like specifically, but like if you can get like at least 5 things right, and then understand tonality, voice, messaging, personality, that's where I kind of like sit. I don't want to be known as the guy that can like sketch things and then scan them and redraw them, and like it's very niche, right? And I don't know. I don't.
Yeah. And it's also not helpful. It's like, business leaders, they have goals, and they need a return on their investment. And so considering the audience is crucial, and considering their business goals is crucial to having it inform the creative. And I feel like, I hate to say it, but there's just some creatives or designers who have more of a sophomoric, a singular approach to how they service their clients. And if you're a designer and you're listening to this and you're not very happy about me saying it, like, that's just the truth. Like, I have a lot of these conversations with Jordan because, like, I come at this from a different perspective.
Yeah,
and
business,
like,
right?
Yeah, like when I'm doing creative process with Jordan, it's fun to do these sessions. But at the end of the day, I just need the website done. I just need the social media done. Like, I just need things to get done. I'm not reveling in the creative of every single post because I have other things to worry about. So like, I can take 2 or 3 days to do a deep dive with Jordan on these sessions, but after that I've got to move on to like do other things. And that's the mindset that business leaders are in when they're working with you.
And so to build the trust to get to this place, like, I can toil over the colors and the pixels and the choice of photography and what we're doing, and they trust me that I'm making the right choices because we've done the work together. Now, I will say this: in creative agencies and studios and corporations that I worked at, when you get to this point in a process, there's two paths here. There are the people and the groups of agencies and creatives that lean heavily on like documentation and research.
Yeah.
And so they'll spend a lot of time doing all of that to validate like kind of a mediocre thing that gets presented.
Right.
And then there's the other camp, which is like the artist designer type that will go quiet for 6 weeks and then present something and then sell the context, sell the story to the client and kind of oversell it to make it bigger than what it actually is.
Right.
When in reality, like they kind of didn't have a process. They just want to like feel it out and see what makes them feel. And then it's their perspective and all of that. Right.
Right.
Where what I'm doing is I'm joining hands with the business and we're going on this quick, short journey, shorter than other places.
Yeah.
We go on this journey together and they trust that I'm making the right decisions on their behalf because I've heard them out.
Right. Yeah. So something comes to mind, which is, if someone's listening to this podcast and maybe they're not thinking about hiring you, they're already talking to another designer, or something like that. Like, what sort of questions or qualifiers should they be asking to a designer to kind of unearth whether or not the designer has the type of process that's going to service their goals?
Well, I would say walk me through your process. Help me understand how we're going to get to, the end goal of what we're trying to achieve. And then I would say, what happens if that doesn't work out the way that we anticipate? Like, what happens if something comes up in that process where things change?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
I would ask kind of, what are your expectations of us? Mm-hmm. And then like share what your expectations are of the designer. How involved are you in the process? And like help me understand what that looks like. What's the best way to correspond? Are we going to have, weekly check-ins, or are we going to talk through email? Mm-hmm. Show me how this process has worked in other areas, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think designers traditionally it's kind of been like, very feel good, like make the client feel good, give them a price, justify this price, give a creative brief, we'll do some mood boards and we're going to kind of sell you. It's very salesy the whole way through.
Yeah.
And I am not a salesperson.
Right.
So I am a process creative guy.
Right.
And like my sales is talking through my process.
Right.
Right. Like I'm not going to sit there and tell you that like, this mood board is going to change your life, and I'm not going to tell you that like, there's so many like synergies and possibilities, and let's have a think over coffee about the possibilities of transforming your brand, right? Like I'm going to walk you through my process, and I know it's worked, and like I'm not going to guarantee you, but for the right price, I can guarantee a few things.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So I think that design. And a lot of designers are come from like this art background where like systems and processes are allergic, like they're allergic to that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for like the engineers and developers. But like, I don't believe creativity is magic and it comes out of thin air.
Yeah.
I think that there are buckets of things and there's nonlinear thinking. But if you can organize that a little bit, then the creative stuff is easier to kind of get to.
Yeah.
And you can also like look at other people's work and you can kind of see where they got their creative influences from. Mm-hmm. You can see like where they've pulled ideas from and like what inspires them, right? So
right.
I think just asking thoroughly like what's your process, right? And like I'm doing this so people can like get a grasp and like leaders and founders and business people like understanding the brand, take this stuff away, take it internally. Like, don't hire me.
Yeah.
You don't have to hire me. I'm not here to like sell that. I'm here to like share that like there are possibilities in the digital world that you can be more impactful, because I think I'm tired of seeing just mediocrity, right? And I've seen mediocrity at like the startup level, and I've seen mediocrity at the $1 billion company level.
Yeah.
And so, ask anyone that's worked with me, anyone that's sat in a room with me, like I push people, I challenge people, and that's what I do. So I hope that this challenges people that listen to this, whether you're a designer or a business leader, that like you're challenged by some of the stuff that I'm saying. Take it for what it is, use it, don't use it. Like, that's fine. But I think that there is a responsibility of designers today to be better people, to have better processes, to share the value and the importance of their work. And, if you're going into design, or if you've been a designer and you have this artistic approach, like the world's moving way too fast to care about your art and your emotions and how it makes you feel.
Right.
Like there's a time and a place for that, but there's a time and a place to realize that like design is changing, the world is changing, technology is changing. And because of that, like we need to start thinking about design bigger than the pixels and the colors and how it makes people feel.
Yeah.
I don't know who, maybe it was Andy Warhol or something, but like the art of business, right? There's a quote about like, the art of business is like the greatest art of all. I think it's Andy Warhol. And, I kind of like, I get that,
you have a really healthy respect for just like how much responsibility business leaders carry. And you're really just trying to be additive. And I think, for people who are listening to this who have not branded themselves or their company, like, it can be an investment. And you might be wondering, like, do I want to make this investment into myself or my business? And I agree with Jordan, like hire whoever you want, but like ask those questions that he mentioned to try to forecast what the process is going to be like with a designer. Because if you have a false start with a branding person or designer, you may not attempt it again because it was such a bad experience, or it cost too much money, or like you just think it's a bunch of hooey and you're like, I don't have time for this malarkey, and you just move on to more tactical things, and then you never give yourself the chance to express who you are and what you're trying to do. Before we move on to the next pillar, I just want to ask this question another way, because I'm thinking about something. So you mentioned like, the kind of questions to ask a branding person or a designer. Like when I was working a lot in film finance and I was interviewing a lot of directors who were looking for financing from investors, and I had to assess like who was going to be best positioned to make a really great film, I would talk to directors a lot about like casting and the script and things like that. But the red flag for me would always be, I would ask them, well, who are your selections for your heads of department if this gets greenlit? Like, who's going to be your director of photography? Who's going to be your, your grip? Who's going to be, your costume designer? Who's going to be like, who's going to help you express your visual expression? You'd be surprised how many directors like hadn't done that work yet. And like movies, they are like 100 to 250 people large, the crews. And so you have to rely on people to get your creative expression across. And if you're not hiring the right people, the vision in your head is not going to be materialized. And so you're not going to end up making the movie that you intended to make. So like for me, like that was like a red flag question that I would kind of say yay or nay. Like I'm going to try to help and support this director based on that. Are there any like red flag questions or like just things that would come up early on where is someone who's thinking about hiring a brand specialist or a designer, like they can kind of be like, oh, this is not a good idea to hire this person, or, oh, this is absolutely the person for me?
I think when it leans into, we have to see how it feels. We have to see, like, we kind of have to, explore how it feels, and we're not really sure. That's kind of a red flag for me.
Right.
And from a business perspective, because it leans into too much subjectivity.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about business, yes, there's subjective things in design and this creative work, right?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that subjectivity needs to be attached to reason and good decision making.
Yeah.
And it's not about a singular person and how they feel, or a singular collective company thinking, well, we know our taste better than everybody.
Right.
We're the taste makers and we're the decision makers on creative. It's kind of like, I don't really agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think the world is moving way too fast for that to be the case anymore. And this is why I've systemized my work and my creative kind of direction and the data and all of that, right? So, I think gone are the days where design is art. I think design needs to be more about business and more about achieving business goals through brand impact and storytelling. And there are ways everybody's on the internet now, and the way in which we design websites or mobile apps or experiences or platforms or e-com or selling products, right? All of that stuff is very important. And there's a story there. The story is not about you and your brand. The story is about how the person that's experiencing your brand and how you fit into their lives. And so put aside that, well, we don't know, we got to see how it makes us feel. And then they try to oversell it. They'll try to oversell it, right? So the overselling is a red flag for me.
I think that's a really, really good tip. And you said something in there about like gone are the days of like, I don't know what you said exactly, but like you have a soul. Jordan Lee has a soul. And he, is really, he is an artist at heart, but like you express it through other channels. Like you have your music, you have like your art that you put out on other channels. So like you do care about the art, but you're not trying to satiate that through your business relationships and your clients, where I think a lot of designers or branding specialists, like they went to art school and then they found their way to this job, being a consultant or whatever, and they're saying things like, well, we have to see how it makes us feel. Like they're blending two things that maybe shouldn't be blended.
To me, the soulfulness and creativity and expression is a very personal and sacred thing.
Yeah.
And there's a time and a place for that.
Yeah. Right.
And for me, it's more like narrowing the guardrails or putting all of that in a pressure cooker. I don't give it freely to things that don't require it.
Well, you said it 10 times better than me. That's,
I just have a lot of respect for the time and place where the art needs to be art, and also infusing that at the right moments where it can be. Can I give an example?
Yeah.
So I was creative director at an agency like, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And at this agency, it was a lot of younger people. And then there was like older people that were kind of running the marketing and all of that. And the tone of what was going was very like jester everyman. And, they saw like my work outside of all of this. And I did a lot of creative direction there. And one of the things was to shoot some commercials. And we talked through kind of who this is for, right? And so the elevation of that, the stakes were higher because, you know, as that agency, they needed to like promote themselves to like older, seasoned executive types that would experience their brand, but it's ran by a lot of younger people and kind of this very casual, fun-loving thing. Like, and so we talked through that, and I went out and I hired a crew and worked with some great people, and we shot 4 commercials, I think, in like 2 days.
Wow.
Right? And then we edited them, and I was very particular about the rhythm, the tone, the message, and kind of all the music and everything, right?
Yeah.
So we get it done, and we come into a room and like turn the lights down. I was like, oh, this is the first preview of these commercials. And like I showed them to some of the people that worked there, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like sitting in the room. I think there was like 3 or 4 of us, and I kind of previewed before it went out to everybody, and like turned the lights on, and like 2 of the girls like that I worked with, like they were crying.
Wow.
They were crying because of like the tone of this was something that like really. So what I'm saying is like there's a time and a place, and that energy in the pressure cooker needs to be hyper focused where impact is most important.
Right.
So, you know, I have many examples of like that, right? But like that's my approach to like where do we infuse art, and is it meaningful and impactful for the thing, right?
Yeah.
Which is very different than like I'm not trying to make somebody feel super emotional on a checkout page, you know, for an e-com platform.
Yeah.
Like the goal there is get through that as easy and as painless as possible for the customer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a lot of respect for
I know you do.
the sentiment of that, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, thanks for leaning into it a bit. 'Cause
Yeah. Well, you had never heard that story before. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you put a finer point on it, because I know how much you respect art in a lot of different forms. But I just feel like you're anchored to your responsibility when you're working with clients,
Right.
of, you know, what are the goals and what's going to move the needle and what audiences matter to achieve those goals. That like, yeah,
because it's their money and it's their time.
that's right.
That's what I have a deep respect for. So
Yeah.
let's move on to strategic thinking.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of in this, it's building the strategy from all of these pieces. And so in the work that I do, like I deliver like a 70-page book to my clients, but it's kind of unpacking all of the data, all of the research, all of the discovery, the personality, and the audience's journey, right? And then building a brand story around that, building core messaging, and kind of unpacking those things. So in this work, like I have a few examples of where this is really impactful. So one is I was doing work for kind of a celebrity client that is very well known.
Yeah.
And she came to me and we worked through a lot of this stuff, and it was very strategy focused. And, you know, long story short, built a pathway and a roadmap of her personal brand to position herself as kind of this bigger than life inspiration for people in certain areas. But since it's just her, how do we think through that and scale that at a business level and at a brand level, right? And, you know, long story short, she has done all of that, has, you know, keynote speaker, putting on events, traveling the world, impacting people, and has a team, and very strategic and very focused on the messaging and what that represents. But she's also like the creative for Deepak Chopra, right?
Yeah.
And that was always the goal. That was
That
her goal.
happened after your work with her.
That's right.
Right.
So the work that I did with her was how do we strategically set her up
Right.
to get to those places
Right.
and scale and
Right.
scaffold
Right.
to do that stuff, right? So, super happy for her. Like,
Yeah.
and so I took her through this process, and it was very like encouraging and liberating, and like, I work with all different types of people, and so she was kind of this open creative type, and it was cool to work with someone like her because she gets what I'm doing, but she didn't have her own aperture widened, right?
Right.
But her job is like widening the aperture of everybody else.
Right. And she needed her own she needed perspective on her own self.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, she got emotional in those meetings too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, she
Yep.
was really, really happy. Now, so for strategy, that's an example of you working with an individual who then leveled up to something that was like a big goal of theirs. Can you give an example of strategy with something that maybe is like not a person?
Yeah. So, I'll be very careful about what I say here, but like I did some stuff with Disney internally, right? And designed and built a mobile app. Okay.
And you're being careful because just be careful.
Just because,
Yeah.
But, Disney is this brand. It's the brand of brands, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I've worked on so many different brands with Disney, like I think 8 or 9 at the moment.
Right. And you've won awards.
Yeah.
Many awards internally at the company.
So I know like the umbrella of the major Disney brand.
Yeah.
And all of these other little brands that, I mean, they're not small, right? But like, World, Disney World, Disneyland, Hawaii, Alani, Shanghai, Paris, etc. Right? Like I understand the audiences and the brand and what's going on there. So, in this strategy, I took stakeholders through to redefine kind of some corporate brand stuff to, build this app. But the app was the tactic.
Yeah.
They were like, can you build this thing? It's like, yeah, but like, let's go through all of this, right?
Right.
And so through all of that and kind of the work and the strategy, it redefined kind of the approach of a lot of things within corporate as far as like who they are as a brand. The experience that people have with Disney at the theaters and at the parks is very magical and all of that. But like the corporate side of Disney is kind of faceless and it's very like stiff and sterile.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of move the brand to be a bit more corporate, professional, but approachable and elevated, right? And so I did that work there. Another example is with REI.
Yeah.
So doing stuff with REI when I was there in Seattle, I came up with the idea of the experience of REI traditionally for decades has been the in-store customer help, and they find you exactly what you need for what you need at the right time, and you're going to pay the premium price for that, right?
Yeah.
There was that was a huge miss on the website side, the online side.
Right.
It wasn't translated there. So I thought, how can we merge the digital and the physical? So I came up with the idea of like building this app that the employees in the stores could use to find all of the products inside of that store to quickly help their customers, right? Mm-hmm. So this was 11 or 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. This wasn't like normal, right? Mm-hmm. This wasn't a thing. Yeah. So I got access to like the database of all the SKUs for the stores and designed and built this thing, and then we tested it, and like my customer was the employees in the store. Their customer was the customer coming in. lots of great feedback. And so that strategy kind of helped fuse that merging of like physical meets digital. You know, they saw something online, they wanted to come in, and now we can quickly like find the things that we have. So, you know, buying outdoor gear is very tactile. Like it's very difficult. Like you want to be there in person to touch it and feel it and try it on, see the quality, right? So that I think was a very helpful strategic move, right? Then people can kind of see maybe 3 or 4 hiking boots, and then they can think about it, and they can go home and they can order it, or they see it and they want to buy it right there, right? So it's kind of a step in that customer journey with that. So I would say that's a very strategic thing. All of those examples are very different, right? Like those are 3 like strategic thinking ways. So all of this gets documented as far as like, you know, the messaging, the brand, the personality, the mission, the vision, the purpose, the values, right? And how does all of that become communicated? So this document, this strategic thinking document, then gets disseminated to all of the stakeholders and the people in the company. So as you scale or as you move forward on campaigns or initiatives, it's like this reference book that everybody's aligned. The whole goal is to build creative alignment, right?
Yeah.
So it creatively aligns people to know that we're going to go this direction, and things might, it's the palette might taste a certain way or the colors might feel a certain way, but we're heading this path, right?
Yeah.
And the goal is to fulfill our mission and our vision and stay true to our values. So yeah.
So it sounds like, you know, you do this branding and creative work, you do it from scratch, and build something, you know, from nothing into something. You also do it with really established companies. Sometimes really established companies have more than one brand, it sounds like. Like with Disney, there's the public-facing Disney, and then there's the internal corporate-facing Disney, which has a very different brand expression than external.
Right.
But then you're also applying it to like tactics, it sounds like with REI. They had certain like the mobile app or platform that was like a tactic, right? Where the, you know, customers are seeing something online, they're coming into the store, and so you're modifying brand or creative to enhance an established brand and to affect their bottom line. So you can apply brand and creative in like multiple ways, basically.
Yeah, and with REI, it was really a differentiator.
Yeah.
Right? Because Amazon was right down the road, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like competing with everybody in Seattle, you know, Amazon, REI, Microsoft, et cetera.
Right.
So it was really a strategic differentiator within something that already exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great examples.
Yeah. So the last bits will go pretty quickly, right? But, you know, then we get into like visual elements. So it's all of the pieces that make up the brand visually. So, you know, a brand style guide is a really good way to kind of document this, but maintaining the consistency, but having a reference point to jump off from. And that gets built kind of in those stylescapes, and then we narrow the focus, right? And we say, these are the colors, these are the typography, and do all of these things align back to the archetype? Do all of these things align back to our positioning and our differentiator? Do they align back to the early discovery sessions?
Right.
So all of those visual decisions are made based on alignment between everybody in those working sessions, and also in alignment to who the truth of the brand is trying to express itself.
Right.
So I remove my own subjective kind of taste and think more strategically about like, who is the audience? Who are we serving? What is their journey? What do they expect from a brand of this industry, or what the experience is? So all of the visual elements kind of get bucketed, and then we build, you know, kind of big libraries that can be quickly pulled from. So then it becomes less about the visual feeling and emotion and more about the efficiency of quickly like making the brand move, right? It's the oil in the engine.
Right. And visuals can really move the needle in business. Like I've seen you do it. I'm thinking of one client in particular that works with like athletes, you know, like, can you give that example of like choosing visuals being like a real strategy towards closing business?
Yeah. So photography and video are a really nice way to infuse emotion into something, right?
Right.
It's a really, really powerful thing. And so the right choice of photography or video can really elevate a brand. I don't care what your logo is. I don't care what your colors are. Like the choice of art direction and photography and film is massively important, especially with today, like video and all of that, and just the ability of like the screens and the technology that we have. So the choice through that lends itself to thinking about who the audience is and what's the most appropriate choice of photography. So like going back even before the example that you're giving, like I spent thousands of hours looking at like photography with big corporate clients and editing photos and choosing image selects and like going through the storyboards and like what are we doing for these campaigns and putting things together and going on photography shoots, right? Like, so I've done that, and I've also shot photography on film sets, and I've just the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's really, it can make or break a company.
Yeah.
So with this example, we go through the process, right? And we get to photography, and there's kind of 3 style directions that we want to go. So I choose really powerful images, like, 10 here, 10 here, and 10 here in different categories. And have that conversation with the stakeholders around what these will be for, how they will be communicated and presented. And it's a very, like, you have to be really sensitive to that, but the quality of the choices have to be, bar none, right? And so it's really about, you have to understand what a good photo is, but deeper than that, you have to understand what the emotional reaction is, because when people see an image, 1 to 2 seconds. I mean, we're scrolling on our phones, and like, I can scroll on Instagram for 5 minutes, close my phone, and not tell you a single thing that I saw.
Right.
So it has to be something that adds to the moment. It has to be something that's treated like a texture or a flavor or a scent, right? Or a sound. Like photography has to be that.
Yeah.
So it has to elevate and add to whatever you're using it for. And so leaning into that, it's like, what type of photos match the discovery of the brand? Right? Is it very aggressive and like hardworking hero? Or is it kind of the lover, family-oriented everyman, right? And like, what is, and photos are aspirational.
Yeah.
Photos need to be aspirational. So as you're looking through these things and building libraries, you have to kind of put that hat on while you're looking and have a real humble respect for what you're doing.
Yeah.
You have to really kind of, you got, this is where, like, when I say about like art and design, like it's very sacred.
Yeah.
I think there's this emotional thing with looking for photos that, like, you have to have some respect for it.
Yeah.
And so you can look at, everybody I think looks at a lot of photos these days, but like, I've spent my time looking at a lot of photos, so I can quickly see like what's good and what's not. But it's really about what's that emotional thing. And like, I was lucky enough to work with like art directors and creative directors who I still keep in touch with and like care about, but like they taught me this stuff, right? Like they taught me how to look at the emotional thing what are we capturing, what is kind of being expressed
Right.
to the audience. And so I really lean into that. And so building libraries for brands and clients to pull from, knowing that like these photos, I feel confident enough that like they're going to capture what you're trying to achieve. Right. And anything in this world, like lean into that, because this aligns to the archetype. This aligns to the positioning of who you are. This aligns to all that discovery work, right, that we did. So that's one example of the photography, but like also, the choice of colors and the choice of typography and, moving stock footage and stock video, like all of those things have to align back. So like that's why visual elements is not, most designers, they've got a bucket of cool stuff.
Right.
And they're going to like use their cool stuff that like, hey, this is hip now. This is on trend. And I don't want to be an on-trend guy. I want to be a timeless guy.
Right.
I want my work to be timeless. So that's why, that's why the visual stuff kind of comes later.
Yeah.
And I used to be that guy. I used to be the 20-year-old guy that had a bucket of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And like, I just, the world, and you kind of grow up and you learn things about life and business and people and society and culture and where you fit into the jigsaw of, 7 billion people walking the earth. Like, it's not about your bucket of cool stuff anymore.
Yeah.
It's where are you going to contribute that's going to like make people feel like humans? And how do we look at like the digital pixels of we're all, disassociated from each other and we're lonely and we're depressed? If you could make somebody feel something through a photography on an Instagram page, like that's design.
Yeah.
That's
wow. We don't. It's so funny. You and I, like, obviously, we live day in, day out with each other. I don't really get occasion to hear you talk like this, and it's great. I think it's great. We're not talking about washing dishes or
paying the bills,
taking care of the kids,
going to Costco.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So that was visuals. Did you want to give any other examples? I feel like you fully explained everything.
I'll say this. We'll go into the last bit, which is messaging.
Yeah.
So like messaging is really about kind of building your brand positioning statements, building your elevator pitches, your tags, your hooks, your manifestos, the storytelling frameworks. And so all of that has to be done.
Yeah.
Right. And that needs to sink into the visual. That needs to sink into, it needs to be expressed like the personality of the archetype. It has to align back, always align back to the discovery. Right. So through this, like there's very interesting ways that we do this now as a brand, right? Like we always want to align into these things. But I think as a brand establishes itself, I think it can get more creative and more playful with this. And so I think what's really interesting is like through the archetype work and through the early process is identifying interesting archetypes that might be a blend. So you create a unique brand. So like if you are the hero outlaw and you have a tinge of, let's say the sage, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you, in the world that we live in, like there's a polarity of modernism and postmodernism, and it's happening simultaneously. I believe we're at the peak of this thing happening, right? Metamodernism.
Right.
And there's a juxtaposition that can be played with where we have the future and we have nostalgia.
Yeah.
We have people that live on the earth that grew up without the internet, and we have people that live on the earth that only know the internet.
Right.
And we have a future that leans towards, uncertainty, dystopian, like, is it going to be amazing? Is it going to be beautiful? Like, we don't know. And then we have this past nostalgia of like life without phones, right? Where we were going to like Blockbuster and looking for videos and riding our bikes, you know.
Oh, I miss that.
Right? And
Yeah.
So I think in the future, messaging and visual can be played with a lot, and the juxtaposition of these two things not combating each other, but really creating this sensibility that hasn't yet existed. And
Yeah.
I think that brands of the future are probably going to lean into this a little bit, maybe knowingly or unknowingly. But I think like a big brand could do this and be like really, really interesting in that way. So with the messaging, you know, working through all of this creative work and then documenting it, and then building brand vocabulary, building brand statements, building ways in which everybody in the company can communicate what the culture and the archetype and the personality is, from the CEOs to giving keynote speeches to the employees that work in the retail spaces to the customer service person on the phone, right? And so that messaging needs to be documented and communicated. And then the vocabulary of that also gets kind of articulated, right?
Yeah.
So as you're building new campaigns and thinking forward, you have this bucket of stuff that you can quickly pull from and play with, right?
Right.
So the goal is like, let's build, let's document, let's capture all of the work. So then after we do all of this work, everything feels like play.
Yeah.
The campaigns feel like play because we don't have to toil in the colors. We don't have to toil in the messaging. Like, we want to play with our palette.
Right.
We're playing with the brand palette, right? And so when you take the visual and you take the messaging and the words and what we've kind of documented here, now we have this stuff that we can play with. And that's where it gets really fun. So like, this is where like the creative, it's like, this is where the fun begins for like the creatives, right? So, you know, whether it's in-house or they hire us or they give it to somebody else, like, that's the fun part, because all of this work has been done and there's a roadmap, and now it's just about executing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So, you know, I think I'm in the, you know, position of seeing you work with a lot of people, but I've also been in the client seat, where, you know, you have helped me brand a company from nothing, and created it into something. And what you're talking about in terms of like values and being able to, like, you know, pull from a bucket of those things and put it out into the world, like, there are just some things that came out of our branding work that I didn't expect, that was like a pleasant surprise to me. So just to go back, so I was working in film and TV finance with investors, and I really saw my industry changing a lot because Netflix was just taking over by sheer force of spending, and it was hard to compete. I was making offers on movies, and Netflix just kept outbidding me. And so I really had to make a professional pivot to something I was interested in, which was impact investing and venture capital. So now I spend time doing both of those industries, film and TV, and also venture capital. But, you know, in pivoting, I was super nervous, like sweaty palms, nervous about like redefining myself. I had never been a public person. I was always the person behind the movies or behind the TV shows that were getting made. And I was happy to support people who were in front of the cameras. And so I needed to do this branding work. And so you did it with me, and we created this Madre brand for impact investing that I'm really proud of. You can look at it at madre.vc. But towards the end of like our you know, sessions, we kind of ended on like what does Madre stand for? And they were like different values that the company holds that isn't for public consumption necessarily, but for what people inside the company need to align to and should believe when they work at the company. And I found that to be incredibly helpful, not from a tactical approach, but from like a, if I'm hiring somebody, are they aligned with these things? If I'm writing an internal email, is that aligned to what the core values of the company is? And I just thought that was a really lovely added bonus that it just seems like you go 2 or 3 levels deeper into brand value and you don't just stay on the surface. And I thought that was great.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a moral compass to everything.
Yeah.
Right? And, having a compass of the values means that as Madre grows and scales and changes and shifts and, evolves over time, that the compass stays true. Right? So no matter what the next hot trend of, social media or AI or wellness, et cetera, or technology or whatever comes along, right? If it's aligned to the moral compass of Madre, and then in turn, like your values are expressed and they happen to align with, other businesses or people at those businesses, like there's cohesion there, there's alignment there. And it makes things easier, right? And then internally, there's a trust within the company, I think. And so, I remember when we did that work, like you had the name Madre, right? And I think that's important to you at a personal level.
Yeah. But
I also think it's a really fantastic name just in the climate of things, and then like what Madre represents as far as like nurture, right?
Right.
And I think you give a lot of thought and nurture to everything. And the work that you do is not, so it's like a lot of that nurturing that happens with you is not seen.
Right.
And so you had to step into this space where you had to be seen and step out, right? And I think you stepping out in that nurturing, careful, considered place is very important to the values of Madre, no matter what Madre is doing or will do, right?
Right.
So I remember like that was, Madre, and I think the name really like influenced. And so it was really getting to the bedrock of who you were and like what your vision was, right? And then, I think Madre maybe subconsciously or consciously was the ethos, but leaning into that a little bit more, and we unpacked that, right?
Yeah, I think that Madre being Spanish for mother, it was an approach to the business that I think once we dug in and understood that I had a very nurturing approach to the people that I work with, it became evident very quickly that Madre was not going to be a high volume business. Like I wasn't going to, and I still won't, is try to scale or emulate like Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz or like the big VC firms that have, all these people working there, vetting deals and stuff. Like I work with a handful of people, a handful of founders or filmmakers every year. And I just have to be really careful about who I choose to work with because if I try to go high volume, I care so much, it's going to eat into my personal life. And then there's just diminishing returns on the value of like what I can give to each person I've committed to. And I don't know that I knew that before I did the branding process. And so I feel like the brand kind of informed the operations of the business as it was starting, because I realized really early on, like, oh, this is the identity of the company and this is how I need to work with people. And it informed the workflow. So I think that was really vital. So that's like applying to, my messaging, applying to my company. But like, I'm also thinking about like, the founder that I introduced you to, where they had a deck and they had messaging, and it was fine. They were a successful company. They had a Department of Defense contract, which is very coveted in those circles. Like, a lot of revenue and money coming into the company, but they were pivoting the identity of the company to something more public facing rather than private, government facing. And so as they were making that pivot with identity, they just weren't nailing the messaging, and they needed to go out for a round of financing. And, I was talking to the founder about doing that, and I was trying to solve a problem for myself, which is like when helping, a founder raise capital, like, it can take a really long time. And I was trying to be more efficient. And so we can get into that in a different episode. But basically, we talked to the founder about how to change the messaging. And he worked with you before I went out to investors. And you redid the messaging, you redid the deck. Yeah, you can talk about the other work that you did with him that I'm like not mentioning. But a process that usually takes months to raise and close a round. We closed that round in 10 days. We raised over $10 million in 10 days. It was a Series A. So it was like, pretty early stage. And I thought that was a huge success. And I would contribute a healthy part of that to how you dug in to the identity of the company and the messaging and the materials that we put in front of the investors to kind of galvanize them to write a check and, wire funds.
Yeah, I think with that and that example and a few other clients that I work with, it's really that, humans naturally understand story. And like being with you, like I've become more in tune to story. I'm definitely more visual audio type, but like really, really love story. And so with that, it was how do we reconfigure things to present that tells a story of what we're trying to do, but also captures a bigger story and allow people to quickly grasp that, right? Because time is money, and you want to tell a story that's captivating. And so with like storytelling frameworks in branding, there's formats that people are very familiar with in film, TV, literature. Like we're accustomed to, humans are accustomed to story. Like our whole civilization is driven from story, right?
Yeah.
So taking those big categories of how to tell a story and then reconfigure them or use them in like a scenario of putting a pitch deck or something together for somebody, telling that story, like it becomes impactful because people are familiar with it. So what I'm trying to say is like storytelling frameworks are really important. And, I build those and document those and articulate those, but it's less about the story. It's less about the story of the brand and more about the story of like, what's the effect that this is going to have on the audience, right? So what's the opportunity of that investor and how are they going to be a part of something that's going to literally change the world for the better?
Yeah.
That's the story to be told.
Yeah, I think that company definitely will do that. And I just want to say that, like, when you're talking about story and narrative, like, you're not just talking about soft story. Like, you're talking about you were working with the founder within the confines of you figured out, like, deeper narrative for that founder, but also you were working within the confines of KPIs, IRR, total addressable market, serviceable addressable market. Like, it wasn't just like soft storytelling. It was like, oh, we need to, change these slides. You need to word this differently to make it more clear for the investors. So I think it was the combination of the big macro narrative of like how this company is going to change longevity and wellness for people around the world, to, okay, let's get down to brass tacks and talk about, like, what is the time horizon on the investment and things like that, because both of those matter. It's both right-brained and left-brained material that you were working with to weave a narrative. But you know how to do that with people to move the needle. And I think within the pillar of messaging, I think it's important to articulate that, like, I think you're unique in that way, that you recognize, understand, and appreciate both sides of that storytelling.
Yeah. So the metric side, right? I'm remembering this now, but like, it was very metrics, data based stuff, right?
Yeah.
And like, if you start a presentation just leaning into all of that, like, you're going to lose the audience's attention.
Yeah.
So how do you bookend that with storytelling frameworks, right? Of here is the existing world,
right?
And here's the challenge,
right?
And here we are as a brand, as the guide who has built something that can transform everything. And how can we usher in kind of this new world of opportunity? Oh, and by the way, here's our metrics and data to back this up.
Right.
So join us in investing and moving along into the future